Good morning and welcome to Middlebury. We're excited to join you in talking about the Clifford Symposium, which we began this afternoon here on campus. It's called Toni Morrison, The Origin of Others, a Middlebury Conversation. So we have a chance now to include you in that conversation. Toni Morrison has written a book that addresses issues that all of us face day in and day out, wherever we live, in whatever state, in whatever city, in whatever part of a city. It also touches us throughout the country in rural areas as well. We've been talking about things like this for a long time, and we will engage this conversation for the next 3 days during the Clifford Symposium, and we will continue the conversations long after these 3 days are over, because they're important questions, they're important topics that affect us all. This is the book, Toni Morrison's The Origin of Others. When several of my colleagues and I began to think about this symposium, this book spoke to us, to every one of us, in part because it is Toni Morrison's voice that we will hear and her words that we will read, but more importantly because her voice and her words speak to important issues. And those are the sorts of issues that we wrestle with here at Middlebury on a regular basis. We'll do it in a lot of ways. Two of my colleagues to whom I'll introduce you in a moment will be speaking in typical sorts of keynote addresses. But we will also hear students read from Toni Morrison's work, both from this book and from some of her novels. We will also hear musical performances. There will be a dance performance, a live theater performance that brings one of Toni Morrison's short stories to life again. And in all these ways, conversations will be interwoven through everything that we do. So welcome this morning to this part of the conversation. Let me introduce you to my colleagues who will be joining us this morning. Jay Findley, who teaches in African American studies and also in gender studies. Shatavia Knight, a student who is graduating in 2020. Shatavia has been very involved in putting together the Student Forum. And finally, Will Nash, who is also in American literature and focusing on African American literature. So we will engage in a bit of a conversation here and invite you to listen in. We also invite you to send us a question. If something comes up in the course of our conversation that you want to engage in, send us a note, and somehow or other it will be communicated to me and I will find a way to pass it on. So feel free to join very directly in the conversation. I'm going to begin with a question to Jay, which I will shape this way. The title of your keynote address this afternoon alludes to lines in Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved. People listening to us now will be able to hear it when we post it on the Clifford Symposium website later. But can you speak briefly now to how those words speak to you? And here they are. Yonder they do not love your flesh. Nia Robinson, by the way, will be reading from that speech in Beloved at the Student Forum on Friday night. So they're clearly words that speak broadly. What is it that speaks to you in those words?
Well, first of all, hi everybody out there who's watching today. But yeah, the title of my talk is "Yonder They Do Not Love Your Flesh," and one of the reasons why I chose to give it that title is because I think it speaks to the kernel of what my talk is trying to get at, which is essentially thinking about race in the contemporary U.S., because that's sort of what I was asked to talk about in the keynote address. And I think this, that sentence just crystallizes this idea of the way in which race is sort of like borne out, and the ways that Black people have have to sort of deal with that fact. So I think Baby Suggs in Beloved, when she goes on with this sermon, there's something about this idea of loving oneself in spite of the condition of slavery. I think there's something about that calls out to me about what it means today, about what it means to be Black in America today. So that's why I chose that particular line to be the title.
Yeah. And those lines are also now on the new National Memorial for Freedom and Justice in Montgomery. So as you walk through what's now being called the Lynching Museum, you see these words from Baby Suggs' sermon. So again, these are words that just speak so dramatically in so many ways.
Absolutely, and that's, well, you'll hear it in the talk today, so I talk a little bit about that connection.
Good. Yeah, great. Shatavia, you were the one who were largely responsible for putting together the collection of readings for the symposium, for the student forum on Friday night. You chose both the readings and the readers, and this was one of them. Can you tell us a little bit about how and why you chose those readings and what you hope the audience might take away in hearing Toni Morrison's word in the voice of our students?
So yes, specifically going on what Jay was talking about, this is one of the readings, Yonder they do not love your flesh. That one specifically spoke to me because even it tells you the conditions that people of color and Black people specifically live in, and then it also kind of gives you a guide on how to deal with it. And so when you're given the situation of where people do not love you and they want to silence you, what do? You decide to love yourself. And so that specific one I chose, and then I chose a number of other readings from different books, including Song of Solomon and from The Origin of Others. And I chose them because I wanted them to make people uncomfortable, but I also wanted it to also demonstrate love, in that we have the Isaac Woodward story, who was a veteran who was beaten and whose eyes were gouged out and who became blind. And so I have someone read that story to make people uncomfortable and say that even though this story is a long time ago, there are stories that are very similar to that are happening now. And that kind of makes people reflect on how far have we really come when it comes to race. And I also have readings in there that really have us think about, like, what does it mean to be othered? Like, why is this so important? And specifically, I chose from the foreword by Ta-Nehisi Coates, where he talks about why this book is so relevant now, specifically when talking about the election of President Trump and how afterwards racism and the conversations about racism kind of just died down. And so those are some of the readings that I picked and why they were so important to me.
And you're beginning, interestingly, with the words of Toni Morrison herself, reading from Song of Solomon. She was here at Middlebury at the Breadloaf Writers Conference in 1977, reading from Song of Solomon in August. It appeared in print in September of that year. And while she was here for the Breadloaf Writers Conference, she actually read from the book. And we will hear Toni Morrison from 1977 with that reading.
And then I pick up right after her.
Yeah, so great. We will hear Toni Morrison. We will hear Toni Morrison's voice in the voice of Middlebury students reading from her book. Yeah.
Can I I wanted to follow up on that, because I think that there's like a lot of interesting connections between the reason why you chose the readings and the kinds of themes that I'm going to talk about in my keynote. In particular, thinking about flesh, because and thinking about the centrality of flesh and othering, so what it means on the material level, I think, to become an other, and how that, how the everyday reality of otherness is really like lived out in the real world. I think that's another reason why this particular line called out to me to sort of center my talk around.
Well, let's push this a little bit further then. The title of the book is The Origin of Others. What is Morrison's point here in talking about others? Will, can you speak to that?
I don't think she has one point.
Yeah.
I think there are myriad points. Excuse me. And one of the things, to pick up on Jay's comment, that I think is really interesting about this is do not love is the phrase that Morrison uses. And then she goes on to enumerate the number of ways that do not love boils down to acts of violence, right? The do not love means hate. And I'm not suggesting that she would say that othering always means hate, but I think othering is a step on the path towards the possibility for hate. And I think it's really interesting to think in assessing this book of essays about what she's saying about how we've gotten to where we are now, when do not love has been enacted as hatred, and about the choices that we hopefully have now about what we're going to make do not love mean and othering mean in this moment. You know, I mean, there's a lot of, I think one has to decide how one feels about both where we are and the possibility for where we can go as a culture around issues of race. And I think Morrison gives us a lot of room to make that decision. This is neither a despairing nor an unqualifiedly hopeful book, in my estimation.
Yeah, this is some very honest approaches to a lot of ways we make others. So clearly race is a prominent theme, and because so much of Morrison's work is informed by history,
Right.
and American history has race and enslavement from its core
Right.
beginnings. This is a main theme in the book, but there are other ways she speaks about the ways human beings make others and therefore lessen the humanity of the person that is being made an other, but also harming the person who chooses to make someone else an other and to some extent a lesser human being.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that, I feel though there are many ways in which othering has origins, I also believe that one of the ways in which we allow othering to continue, one of the things that kind of allows othering to permeate our society is that our refusal to address it and to understand that there are a group of others. And in terms of us refusing to talk about race and saying, we've talked about this, slavery is over, what more do you want? I feel like that refusal to understand that there's still more to go and that there's a group of people, and there are many groups of people that still feel like others and who still don't believe that they belong in a specific society, is something that allows othering to continue, and why this book is so important. And that, yes, before there were political and actual structures that made us other, but there are still social structures that deeply make us believe that we're others. Even though it's not written in law, it still definitely feels like it.
And you made similar comments, Shatavia, when you included a word to incoming students. We gathered with all incoming students during orientation, having sent them this book and invited them to read it. So we had 50-something discussion groups going on one night when all the incoming students and 50-something faculty and staff talked about this book. And you made a statement in that this book is your segue into what it means to be an active and informed citizen and guides you to what change should look, sound, and feel like. That seems to be what you were just saying too.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I just believe that, well, I'm really happy that Middlebury decided that this be the book that that first years read, because coming into Middlebury is historically a very white campus, and so having people understand that they either have been othered and may be othered, and also for people that I feel like it's important to identify yourself as someone who does not fit into the other. That's someone who is privileged in many ways and hasn't experienced being othered, and so reading this book lets them know that there are people who don't live the way that they do. Basically, like how certain Middlebury students have lived and how they see the world in different ways in their experiences. And some people just haven't lived through that. Some people have only been through their lives and they've only seen that. And so them reading this book could be their first picture into what it means to feel like you don't belong.
Well, I think to sort of get at what it means to have a Middlebury conversation around this particular book, because this is what the symposium is about, essentially, is what does it mean to talk about the kinds of issues of others and strangers in this particular community. This is an institution of higher education, right? And I think one of the things that Toni Morrison's essays do is they get at what does it mean to be educated in the process of becoming the other, of becoming the stranger, of being a stranger. Right? So I think to open up conversations where you can have them in many different places, right? Like it's not just about going to Will's Toni Morrison seminar. I mean, that's great and everything, but you would hope that people are leaving the seminar and talking about some of these things outside, right?
Absolutely.
And she raises this. She says, what does it mean to be educated in the process of becoming the other? She says, how does one move from, at one point she says, how does one move from the non-racial womb to the womb of racism, right? So that racism is one way in which people become others, radical others. So how is it that here in this community, right, we can, at what points can education intervene? Because what we know is what we know, and that's all we can know, you know? But if you sort of make this commitment to even engage in one question that Morrison asked in one of the chapters, in one of the essays, I think there's something productive about that.
And the way we phrase this to entering students, and will become part of the conversation over the next 3 days at the symposium, is that Morrison refers to her new book in progress in the course of this book, which were lectures at Harvard, the Norton Lectures at Harvard in 2016. And she says, in my new book in progress, I'm going to address how education works toward racism, or how racists are educated. And it's clear in the way she shapes this book that she has some ideas about where that book may go. But we decided we weren't going to wait until we get it, and we're going to engage some of those questions now amongst ourselves. Will, where are you hoping those conversations will go?
Well, I am hoping that, to pick up on what Jay said, because I think it's spot on, I'm hoping that the conversations will go out of the rooms this weekend and into and through our broader community. You know, and I am teaching a Morrison seminar this semester, and it's the first time I've ever taught a course just about Toni Morrison. I've been teaching African American literature here since the 90s, but I chose to do it because we're also having the Clifford. And the notion that we can start talking about how these ideas of being educated about otherness and being educated about our complicity in racism, which I'm going to distinguish from being educated about race. Ta-Nehisi Coates mentions a book in the introduction called Racecraft that I think is a really powerful tool for reframing those conversations. I hope that we have the strength and the courage to dig into the ways that our community is implicated in this process of creating others, and really wrestle with what we can do as a community of learners to educate ourselves and prepare ourselves to combat those things.
Jay, sometimes conversations about these issues can get tough.
Yeah. So.
You got any words of wisdom on that? About how we engage those hard conversations?
Yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, I think if you're having a conversation about race or processes of othering, and you're not uncomfortable, and you're not having, and it's not, to use your words, frank speech, then are you really having a conversation about it? You know, I think it's really sort of useless to not have a frank conversation at this point. You know, I mean, I don't think race and racism is something that we should continue to pussyfoot around, and that was something that actually was challenging for me in conceiving of and bringing off the keynote address that I'm going to be delivering tonight is, you know, what are the punches to pull, you know, or how frank am I going to be when I talk about the kinds of issues that I feel like need to be addressed at this particular moment. What do I say? I say, if you want to talk about it, I feel like don't not be frank, you know? I mean, I get that question all the time. People who take my classes, they say, you know, these are hard questions. You know, people are sort of afraid to address them head on, and that's just not me. You know, I feel like I don't know what to tell people because for me that's not necessarily uncomfortable, I guess.
Is it different, do you think, inside the classroom and outside the classroom to engage in these difficult conversations?
Yeah, I specifically wanted to speak to that, and that in the classroom, professors are able to have these conversations and have a bit of validity because they're professors, and and you go to class to learn, and like you expect that what your professors are saying are fact, and you take it as that. Whereas in social situations, there have been many times in which you try to talk to someone about race and they're not very receptive because you aren't a professor and because you're a student, and what do you know about race? Why are you so angry? Why does this matter to you so much? And so having the Clifford Symposium is specifically really important to me, and the classes that Will and Jay teach are really important because these are conversations that I get to have where I have a voice and I believe that my voice is important. And in social situations where you want to correct somebody on something, it's kind of brushed off and it's like well, you know, just be quiet. And in this case, the symposium is a place where I don't have to be quiet and where what I have to say matters and what Toni Morrison has to say matters. And so we have similar ideas, and so in that way, I get heard through her and through my professors in a way that I wouldn't be able to do alone.
Yeah. Will, what do you think? Classroom, outside the classroom? You're involved, you've been teaching, as you said, African American literature for a long time here.
Yeah.
You've seen topics come and go. You've seen moments of tension come and go.
Right.
What's the classroom and outside the classroom in the way you find yourself being a member of the Middlebury community?
Well, here's an interesting thing about that. Even when I'm outside the classroom, I don't shed my professor skin. So I don't have the illusion that students are going to engage with me as if I weren't a professor, even when I'm not in the classroom. So it's difficult for me to speak to what Shatavia just said experientially. I can speak to it in terms of having heard her and other students talk to me about those challenges, right? But it would be dishonest of me to say that I have my finger on the pulse of what outside the classroom is like, except through what students tell me. Inside the classroom, there's a power dynamic that says that whether or not you're uncomfortable, this is what we're here to talk about. And so that changes things. You know, and if one of the ground rules of the classroom is nobody shouts anybody down, right? There's not an enforcer necessarily outside the classroom to put that in play. So that, I think, has a lot to do with what I see as those differences, right? There are things I don't see. What I do believe is that a lot of our students are afraid to have these conversations because they're afraid of being labeled. And I think as a white person who's spent my adult life studying African American literature and culture and attempting to have authentic conversations about it, big surprise, I've made some mistakes. You know, I've had to be called out before. And the world doesn't end when you're called out. It's hard, and it can be painful even. And it's worth it for the potential growth that can come out of it. So I see I see that as one of the challenges that a lot of students in our community seem to me to be wrestling with. It's scary to talk about this stuff. And sometimes outside the classroom, you don't have to confront your fear because you can find the group of people who let you be comfortable. In the classroom, that's not the case. And I think that the way Jay said it is just so absolutely perfect. If you're not uncomfortable in these conversations, then are you really in it? You know? And my hope, to come back to what you said earlier, part of my hope is that with this weekend, we can set a tone that will enable more people to at least try really being in it in our community. You know?
One of the things that becomes clear in reading this book, The Origin of Others, is that Toni Morrison approaches the issues from so many different directions. When you read her novels, for example, she will have numerous voices from point to point, talking about the same thing, but from different perspectives, and frequently in heated confrontations, even within the novel. But she also makes use of art and music and film in talking about this. And over the course of the next 2 or 3 days, we're going to have a number of those other kinds of experiences other than simply talking or hearing lectures. Is there an event in the schedule that any of you are looking forward to that might be in that art part of the way Morrison works?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Matthew Evan Taylor on Saturday morning is going to talk about Toni Morrison and Nina Simone. And I can't wait.
Yeah.
Because I think that his idea of pairing Song of Solomon with Mississippi Goddam, which is one of those just absolutely crucial works of African American music, has the potential to just really blow some people's minds. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So.
I'm really looking forward to the dance recreation of a specific story by Morrison that she was talking about. It's led by Crystal Brown. I forget specifically when it is on the schedule, but seeing that kind of lifted off the paper and it having a story and it being portrayed by two people and then it being a dance and it being expressive, that really kind of gives it a kind of personal relationship that I may not have had previously. When just reading it, you actually get to see people perform, and you get to live in the moment with it. So that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah. And that's the piece that is reflecting on Toni Morrison's short story Recitative.
Yeah.
And it deals a lot with how we use language of color.
Yeah, I'm interested in both of those as well. But also I'm interested in hearing about the student forum,
Yes.
about how that goes. I'm not planning on attending that event because I think that's an event for students, right? And I don't necessarily think that professors need to go to everything that is meant for you all to really sort of open up and talk about these issues. But I am very much looking forward to hearing about how that goes.
Yeah.
And also how Nia brings off Baby Suggs'
Should do a
sermon.
great job.
I'm sure she will.
Yeah, she's good. They're great readings. She's chosen 5 just wonderful readings, got a number of students from all over the campus that are going reading. We were doing a work through last night, and it's very exciting.
You want to shout them out? Who's doing the readings?
Yes, I can. Kyle, shout out to you, Kyle. I have Kylie, Nia, thank you so much, Marquise, and myself.
All right.
Good job.
Picked yourself, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Nice job.
Well, that's the way to show up, though, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
One question has come in. We've talked a little bit about that, but I want to make sure we to see if there's anything more about it. Because somebody writes in, what can students on primarily white campuses do to engage in these tough conversations? What do we do when conversations are necessary but hard to come by?
One of the things that I really want to specifically speak to is that I know that these conversations can be hard, and I know that these aren't things that people necessarily want to embark on, because it's a real journey to go through and talk through some of these issues. And so even on like the lower level, or like maybe if you can't do the conversation, then at least don't make that other person feel like the other. And that a lot of times in many of my classes, I feel like the other because I'm constantly aware that I'm the only Black woman in class. And so being that person that's like, you're not alone, and that I understand, and like just offering to be that friend when that person may not feel like they have one is really important. And that like using your power and using the privilege that you may have as a white person or on a predominantly white campus to make others not believe that they are alone.
Can I offer one suggestion? Is a practical one is don't just assume that because a person is a Black person or a person of color or a queer person or some person that you might have questions about, don't assume that that person wants to talk to you about that experience. Yeah. Because there's classes that you can take where you can come and you can talk about all of those issues within the framework, within like, some boundaries of a class. And there's going to be some readings that help you move through some of those questions. And then I think that's going to enable you to be able to approach perhaps people whose experience you are interested in. But I think just going up to a random person or a person that maybe you know and saying, hey, what's it like to blah, blah, blah? Don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you can't know what that person's work is just to be in that environment. You can't know what it is, what they're wanting to experience or how they're thinking or feeling, and to just come up and presume that because you see a person of color that you have the right to ask them about their experience as a person of color. It's kind of still an exercise of privilege. I mean, meeting people where they are, I think, is one of the things that students on predominantly white campuses can practice in a lot of ways. And, when Isabel Wilkerson was here last spring, she talked about the idea of radical empathy. That notion of thinking about not just how you would feel if you were in another position, but trying to think about how someone in that other position might be experiencing the world. I think that's a skill to practice that can be really beneficial in these kinds of scenarios as well.
And the Engaged Listening Project, which is beginning here, will fit into that as well, of radical empathy, engaged listening, and it's the listening part that becomes important.
But you can also talk, so come take our classes is what essentially we're saying. We're trying to pitch our classes to you.
That's
Show up
right.
at my classes.
Yeah. Good. Thanks to my colleagues and to Shatavia, who's now also a colleague in putting together the Clifford Symposium. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate being a part of it with you. We welcome those of you who may be in the area to come join us for the Clifford Symposium. You can go to the website, which has a full schedule. If you cannot be here, soon after the events are over, we will be posting a number of lectures and other events to the web page so you can see them there. But also think about us. As we go through these conversations over the next few days, we're going to grow, we're going to have new insight, and we're going to continue these conversations for a long time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.